"You're dismissed. Pack your things before lunch." The words echoed through the grand hall of Ashcroft Estate, with a silence so sharp that no one dared breathe. Governors, judges, executives, and senior advisers lowered their eyes as Vincent Ashcroft, the most feared mafia boss on the East Coast, coldly dismissed the one person no one had ever imagined leaving. Eleanor Brooks simply nodded. She didn't argue. She didn't apologize. She quietly placed the brass library keys onto the polished conference table, thanked Vincent for the years she had spent caring for his family's library, and walked away with the same gentle dignity she had carried every single day for the past 12 years. No one followed her. By sunrise the next morning, breakfast ended in tears because the children refused to eat without their morning story. Elderly servants missed their medication. Important family documents vanished beneath mountains of misplaced paperwork. Meetings began late. Even Vincent's own mother looked around the mansion with quiet confusion before asking a single question that made every room fall silent. If she only organized books, why does this house no longer feel like home? The polished oak doors closed behind Eleanor Brooks without a sound. For 12 years, she had walked those hallways carrying armfuls of books, handwritten reading lists, and little reminders that no one ever noticed until they were gone. Today, she carried only a small cardboard box. Inside rested a framed photograph of the Children's Summer Reading Club, a faded bookmark pressed with lavender, and a chipped porcelain mug that read, "Every story finds its reader." No one stopped her. Not because they didn't want to, because no one knew how to question Vincent Ashcroft's decision. The staff stood silently along the corridor as Eleanor offered each of them the same gentle smile. "I hope everyone takes good care of themselves." Housekeeper Martha felt tears sting her eyes. "You too, Miss Brooks." Eleanor nodded once before disappearing through the front gates. Inside the conference room, Vincent continued the meeting as if nothing unusual had happened. The quarterly logistics report. His voice remained calm. The expansion proposal. Executives immediately returned to discussing contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. No one dared mention the librarian. To Vincent, the matter was finished. Eleanor had interrupted him in front of influential guests. Whether she had been correct was irrelevant. Leadership depended upon authority. Authority required discipline. He refused to allow anyone, even someone as harmless as a librarian, to undermine that principle. When the meeting concluded, Vincent left without another thought. The first sign appeared that evening. His 8-year-old niece, Lily, wandered into the dining room, carrying her favorite storybook. "Where's Miss Eleanor?" The nanny hesitated. "She doesn't work here anymore." Lily frowned. But Wednesdays are dragon nights. Every Wednesday, Eleanor read fantasy adventures before dinner. It had become such a routine that no one remembered how it started. Without a story, Lily barely touched her meal. Her younger brother quietly copied her. By the end of dinner, 2 untouched plates remained on the table. The cook assumed the children simply weren't hungry. The next morning, breakfast began 20 minutes late. Not because the chefs were delayed, because no one could locate Lady Ashcroft's favorite antique teapot. Normally, Eleanor reminded the butler every Thursday that it had been moved to the conservatory after family tea. No reminder came. 3 servants searched nearly half an hour before finding it exactly where Eleanor would have remembered. Vincent noticed the delay. "Why is breakfast late?" The butler lowered his head. "A small misunderstanding, sir." Vincent accepted the explanation without another question. Later that morning, Mrs. Delgado, one of the elderly housemaids, nearly collapsed while dusting the west hallway. She had forgotten to take her heart medication. For years, Eleanor had quietly left a handwritten reminder beside her morning tea every Thursday. No one else knew.
When Martha rushed her to sit down, Mrs. Delgado whispered weakly, "I've never forgotten before." Neither woman realized she had never truly remembered on her own. Someone had always cared enough to remember for her. Elsewhere inside the mansion, confusion quietly multiplied. The florist delivered white lilies instead of yellow roses for Lady Ashcroft's sitting room. Nobody remembered she disliked the scent of lilies. A visiting professor arrived to examine rare manuscripts. The books had already been prepared, except no one knew where Eleanor had carefully arranged them. A young footman searched nearly an hour for the children's bilingual picture books requested by Vincent's cousin. They had always appeared exactly when needed. Today, they seemed to have vanished. The books had not disappeared. Only the one person who knew every shelf by heart was gone. Vincent spent the afternoon reviewing contracts in his private office. Everything appeared normal. Business reports arrived on time. Security remained flawless. The estate operated with military precision, yet interruptions became strangely frequent. A secretary knocked twice to ask where archived legal documents were stored. The head chef requested confirmation about the weekend family gathering because Eleanor usually coordinated the children's reading schedule alongside mealtimes. A tutor asked whether anyone knew which grandson struggled with dyslexia because Eleanor always prepared special books for him. Vincent answered each question with increasing impatience. Figure it out. Surely intelligent adults could manage without one librarian. Meanwhile, Eleanor unlocked the modest apartment she had rented years earlier, long before joining the Ashcroft estate. The silence felt unfamiliar. She carefully unpacked her books onto narrow wooden shelves before making herself a simple cup of tea. Her phone buzzed. A message from the neighborhood public library. The children's reading volunteer cancelled tomorrow. Any chance you're available? Eleanor smiled. I'd be delighted. She set the phone aside and looked out the window. She felt sadness, but not bitterness. People often believed kindness meant weakness. She knew better. Kindness was choosing peace when resentment would be easier. Back at the mansion, Vincent's mother wandered into the enormous private library after dinner. The room looked immaculate. Every shelf gleamed. Every book stood perfectly aligned. Yet something felt unmistakably wrong. She walked slowly toward Eleanor's empty desk. No handwritten recommendations. No tiny vase of fresh flowers. No stack of books waiting for curious children. Only silence. She rested her fingertips against the polished wood and sighed. When Vincent entered moments later, she turned toward him. You've kept this library beautifully. He nodded. Of course. She looked directly into her son's eyes. Then, with quiet disappointment, she said, the library was never the reason we kept her. Vincent Ashcroft believed problems could always be solved by hiring the best people. 3 days after Eleanor's departure, the estate's human resources director proudly announced that they had recruited one of the most respected private librarians in New York. Her resume was impeccable. 2 master's degrees, 20 years of archival experience. She catalogued rare manuscripts with astonishing speed and corrected a mislabeled 18th century atlas within her first hour. Vincent glanced over the report. Excellent. As far as he was concerned, the matter was settled. It wasn't. That evening, little Lily wandered into the library, carrying the secret garden. The new librarian smiled professionally. Would you like me to read chapter 1? Lily looked around the room. Where's Miss Eleanor? I'm replacing her. Lily quietly hugged the book to her chest. You can't. She turned around and walked away. The librarian stood frozen. She had spent decades preserving priceless collections. No university had ever taught her how to replace someone's presence. The following morning wasn't much better. One of the kitchen assistants nervously approached the new librarian. Miss Eleanor always knew which cookbooks Chef Romano borrowed. I'm afraid that's outside my responsibilities. An elderly gardener stopped by. Miss Eleanor ordered books about roses every spring. I only manage the library collection. A young housemaid whispered. Miss Eleanor helped me practice reading after work. The librarian hesitated. I'm sorry. By lunchtime, she understood something no interview had prepared her for. Everyone came looking for books. Almost nobody truly needed books. They needed Eleanor. She resigned before the week ended. Vincent frowned when the resignation letter landed on his desk. What reason did she give? The HR director shifted awkwardly. She said, "This position isn't actually about managing a library." Vincent looked up. What does that even mean? No one answered, because no one knew how to explain the invisible work Eleanor had done every day. The second replacement lasted 4 days. He modernized the catalog, installed digital tracking, reorganized shelves alphabetically. Children complained they couldn't find their favorite stories. Lady Ashcroft couldn't locate the poetry collection Eleanor had arranged according to memories instead of numbers. The servants stopped visiting the library altogether. He left quietly. The third librarian survived exactly 1 afternoon. After being asked 17 unrelated questions, including where to find Lily's lucky bookmark, which novels Mrs. Delgado loved after medical appointments, and why the family dog kept sleeping beside Eleanor's empty chair, he politely declined the position before sunset. For the first time in years, Vincent found himself staring at a problem that money couldn't solve. His chief of staff entered cautiously. We've contacted every major private library association, and no one wants the position anymore. Vincent leaned back. Increase the salary. We already doubled it. Triple it. The chief of staff hesitated. I don't believe compensation is the problem. Vincent looked at him sharply. Then what is? The man searched for the right words. I think people believe they're being hired to replace someone impossible to replace. The office fell silent. That weekend, Vincent attended a family lunch. Normally the dining room buzzed with laughter. Today conversations faded quickly. The grandchildren finished eating early and wandered away. His mother absent-mindedly stirred her tea. Even the staff moved more quietly than usual. Finally, she set down her cup. Have you noticed? Vincent looked up. Noticed what? No one lingers anymore. He frowned. They're busy. She shook her head gently. They used to invent reasons to stop by the library. They stayed because Eleanor always made them feel seen. Vincent said nothing. That afternoon, he drove across town alone. Not because he planned to apologize. He simply wanted to understand. The address led him to a modest brick building tucked between a bakery and a flower shop. A wooden sign read, Riverside Community Library. Nothing about it resembled the grandeur of Ashcroft Estate. The paint was slightly faded. Children's drawings decorated the front windows. Flower boxes overflowed with cheerful daisies. As Vincent stepped inside, the soft murmur of laughter greeted him. Eleanor sat cross-legged on a colorful rug, surrounded by nearly 20 children. She wasn't reading. She was pretending to be a confused pirate, searching for a treasure map hidden inside a picture book. Every child shouted directions at once. No, Captain Eleanor. Turn the page. The dragon's behind you. She gasped dramatically and spun around. The room erupted into delighted laughter. Vincent had never seen her like this. At the estate, she had always been calm and composed. Here, she laughed so freely that tiny wrinkles appeared beside her eyes. She looked lighter. When story time ended, the children didn't rush toward the exit. Instead, they lined up to hug her. Each child received a different goodbye. Good luck on your spelling test. Tell your grandmother I'll save the mystery novel. Don't forget your inhaler after soccer. Vincent watched in disbelief. She remembered every detail. Not because she had to, because she genuinely cared. The children finally left. Almost immediately, an elderly man approached, carrying a worn paperback. "I finished the book you recommended." Eleanor smiled. "I knew you'd love the ending. You were right. A young mother arrived moments later. My son finally enjoys reading." "That's wonderful." A teenager shyly returned a novel. "It made me think differently." "I'm glad." One conversation after another. Each brief, each warm, each sincere. No one addressed her as Miss Brooks. To them, she was simply Eleanor. Vincent remained near the entrance far longer than he intended. The library director noticed him. "First time visiting?" "Yes." The woman smiled proudly. "She's extraordinary, isn't she?" Vincent answered almost automatically. "She always was." The director laughed softly. "When Eleanor started here, I thought she'd organize our shelves." She looked around the bustling little library. Instead, she organized people. Vincent watched another child run back inside, just to wave goodbye one more time. Only then did he understand what his mother had tried to tell him. The Ashcroft estate had never been losing a librarian. It had lost the quiet woman who made every place she entered feel like home.
Vincent told no one where he went on Tuesday afternoons. Officially, he had blocked the time for community relations. Unofficially, he found himself parking 2 streets away from Riverside Community Library and walking the rest of the distance, hoping no one would recognize the man whose name intimidated boardrooms across the East Coast. The little library was already buzzing when he arrived. Children were arranging tiny chairs into a crooked circle. Construction paper dragons hung from the ceiling. Someone had taped a handwritten sign beside the story corner. "Guest volunteer. Reader today." Vincent frowned. He looked around. "Who's the volunteer?" Eleanor smiled as she carried in a stack of picture books. "You are." "I beg your pardon? You offered to help." "I merely said I wanted to observe." She tilted her head innocently. "And I observed that you arrived 15 minutes early." Before Vincent could object, 6 children spotted him. "The tall man is here. Is he reading today? He looks like a movie villain." "No," another little boy whispered dramatically. "He looks scarier." The room burst into giggles. Vincent had negotiated billion-dollar mergers without breaking eye contact. Now 20 children stared at him with impossible expectations. For the first time in years, he felt nervous. Eleanor handed him a brightly illustrated book about a dragon who was terrified of flying. "It has different voices." Vincent blinked. "Different voices?" She nodded. "The dragon, the owl, the rabbit, the grandmother, the squirrel." He looked down at the colorful cover as though it were a classified government document. "I wasn't informed there would be squirrels." 5 minutes later, "And then the dragon said—" Vincent paused. What exactly would a dragon sound like? A little girl raised her hand. "Not like that." Another child added, "You're making him sound like somebody's grandpa." Laughter exploded across the room. Vincent cleared his throat. He tried again. The dragon somehow sounded even older. Children rolled onto the carpet laughing. Even Eleanor had to cover her mouth. "I'm sorry," she whispered between laughs. "I truly am." She wasn't. Her eyes sparkled too brightly. By the end of the story, the children had corrected him 17 times. Dragons roar. Owls blink more. Rabbits don't talk that slowly. The squirrel needs more energy. Vincent accepted every correction with remarkable patience. When the final page ended, one little boy gave his honest evaluation. "You were terrible." The room became silent. Then the boy smiled. "But you tried." Another child nodded seriously. "You can come back next week." Vincent surprised himself. I'd like that. After the children left for crafts, Vincent helped stack tiny chairs. I embarrassed myself. Eleanor smiled. You survived. I've commanded armed security teams. And today you were defeated by 6-year-olds. They were surprisingly organized. They learned from librarians. For the first time since meeting her, Vincent laughed without restraint. The sound startled even him. Week after week, he returned. He never announced his visits. He simply arrived. Sometimes he shelved books. Sometimes he repaired broken picture books with transparent tape. Sometimes he carried heavy donation boxes. Children gradually stopped treating him like a stranger. Instead, they gave him assignments. Mr. Vincent, you're too slow. Mr. Vincent, this puzzle goes there. No, that's upside down. He obeyed every instruction with quiet dignity. No executive in his company would have believed it. One Tuesday, Vincent noticed an elderly gentleman entering with a weathered leather satchel. His silver hair was neatly combed. His cardigan had elbow patches. Several children immediately ran toward him. Mr. Harold, read the fairy story. Harold smiled warmly. I suppose I can. Eleanor welcomed him with obvious affection. You found another old edition? I did. I knew you'd appreciate it. Vincent watched them laugh over an ancient fairy tale collection. Something unfamiliar tightened in his chest. During story hour, Harold sat beside Eleanor. Their voices blended naturally as they took turns reading. She smiled often. She lightly touched his arm while laughing at one of his jokes. Vincent found himself staring at the pages of his own book without reading a single word. A little girl tugged his sleeve. Wrong page. He blinked. Oh, you've been looking at that picture for 5 minutes. After the children left, Harold helped Eleanor gather scattered crayons. I'll see you next Tuesday. I'll save your favorite chair. I appreciate that. They exchanged an easy smile born from quiet friendship. Vincent walked over carrying a stack of books that didn't actually need carrying. Need assistance? Harold looked pleasantly surprised. I believe we've finished. Vincent nodded. Very good. An awkward silence followed. Harold extended his hand. I'm Harold Bennett. Vincent Ashcroft. The older man smiled politely. A pleasure. No recognition, no intimidation, no fear. Simply kindness. Somehow. That irritated Vincent more than it should have. Driving home, he found himself asking his chauffeur an absurd question. Do you think Eleanor and Harold are... The chauffeur glanced into the mirror. Friends, Vincent answered too quickly. Obviously. A pause. But perhaps... He stopped. The chauffeur wisely said nothing. After several minutes, Vincent muttered almost to himself. He brings her books. The chauffeur nodded. So do you. Vincent frowned. That's different. If you say so, sir. The following Tuesday, Vincent arrived 20 minutes earlier than usual. Harold was already there. They stood on opposite sides of the entrance like two gentlemen pretending not to notice each other. Harold smiled. You're early. So are you. I wanted the comfortable chair. Vincent looked toward the reading corner. There are 6 identical chairs. Harold chuckled. Not after Eleanor adds cushions. Before Vincent could reply, Eleanor stepped through the doorway carrying a tray of homemade cookies. She stopped, looked at both men, then slowly smiled. You two are competing for the best reading chair. Aren't you? Neither answered. The silence was answer enough. Eleanor laughed so hard she nearly dropped the tray, for reasons Vincent couldn't explain. Hearing her laugh felt strangely more rewarding than winning any business negotiation he had ever fought. Yet beneath that warmth, another realization quietly settled into his heart. For the first time in decades, he wasn't afraid of losing his reputation. He was afraid of losing someone whose happiness no longer depended on him. The annual Ashcroft Foundation Charity Gala transformed the city's historic museum into a glittering showcase of wealth and influence. Crystal chandeliers bathed the grand ballroom in warm light. Politicians exchanged handshakes with business leaders. Philanthropists posed for photographers beside towering floral arrangements. Every guest wore something extraordinary. Vincent Ashcroft arrived precisely on time. As always, conversation softened the moment he entered. Respect followed him like a shadow. Tonight, however, his attention wandered toward the entrance every few minutes. He was waiting for someone. When Eleanor finally appeared, the room did not fall silent because of diamonds or designer gowns. She wore a simple navy blue evening dress that fit her comfortably. No extravagant jewelry, no dramatic entrance, only quiet confidence. She greeted the museum volunteers before acknowledging the city's elite. Several guests smiled warmly. Others barely noticed her. Vincent did. For reasons he no longer questioned, she became the center of every room simply by making the people inside it feel important. "Eleanor!" A group of children from Riverside Community Library rushed toward her. Their parents apologized. "I'm so sorry. They've been excited all week." Eleanor laughed. "It's perfectly all right." One little girl proudly held up a handmade bookmark decorated with tiny painted stars. "I made this for you." Eleanor accepted it as though it were priceless. "It's beautiful." Vincent watched from across the ballroom. Nearby stood directors of multinational corporations carrying gifts worth fortunes. Yet Eleanor treasured a child's paper bookmark more than any expensive donation. He found himself smiling. The evening's program focused on literacy initiatives across the state. The Ashcroft Foundation had donated millions to libraries, schools, and educational programs. Ironically, almost no one knew the woman who had quietly inspired many of those projects. During dinner, Eleanor sat with public librarians, teachers, veterans, and community volunteers. Vincent sat at the head table among governors and executives, yet he kept looking toward her table. She laughed often. She listened more than she spoke. People naturally leaned toward her. It wasn't influence. It was warmth. As dessert was served, the Foundation's newest board member, Richard Hawthorne, stepped onto the stage. Richard was polished, successful, and deeply proud of both. He welcomed donors before inviting several guests to briefly discuss the importance of literacy. Unexpectedly, he looked toward Eleanor. "And perhaps Miss Brooks would like to say a few words." She appeared surprised but accepted politely. The audience applauded. She walked calmly onto the stage. Richard smiled politely into the microphone. Then, with just enough volume for everyone to hear, he added, "After all, it's always charming to hear the perspective of only a librarian." A few uncomfortable chuckles drifted through the ballroom. Others looked down at their tables. Vincent felt his jaw tighten. Before he could rise, Eleanor gently reached for the microphone. She smiled. Not with embarrassment, not with anger, simply with kindness. "When people hear the word librarian," she began softly, "they usually imagine shelves, catalogues, and quiet rooms." A few guests nodded. "But books have never truly been my job." She looked toward the audience. "My work has always been people." Silence spread across the ballroom. "I've watched children discover courage because a story showed them someone else once felt afraid. I've seen lonely widowers smile again because someone remembered which novel their late wife loved." I've watched adults learn to read for the first time at 60 years old. Her voice never rose. It didn't need to. A library isn't valuable because wealthy people build beautiful buildings. She paused. It's valuable because every person who walks through its doors deserves to believe they matter. You don't preserve books because they're expensive. You preserve them because somewhere inside those pages, someone may finally feel understood. Complete silence. No cameras flashed, no glasses clinked. Every eye remained fixed on her. Richard forced a polite smile. Well, that was certainly heartfelt. His words sounded strangely hollow. He glanced toward the head table, expecting Vincent to smoothly move the evening forward. Instead, Vincent slowly stood. The room instinctively followed. He walked to the stage without a single word. Richard stepped aside. For the first time all evening, he looked uncertain. Vincent accepted the microphone. He didn't immediately speak. Instead, he turned toward Eleanor, then toward the audience. When Miss Brooks worked at Ashcroft Estate, I believed she managed a library. A faint smile crossed his face. I was wrong. He looked directly at the board members. She managed something infinitely more valuable. Our family's humanity. A quiet murmur swept through the ballroom. Vincent continued. When I dismissed her, I believed replacing a librarian would be easy. He glanced toward Eleanor. I discovered that kindness cannot be recruited. Compassion cannot be purchased. And trust cannot be demanded. It must be earned. He took a slow breath. The literacy programs this foundation proudly supports carry her fingerprints in ways most of us never noticed. Every child encouraged to read. Every employee treated with dignity. Every tradition that reminded us we were a family rather than merely an institution was stronger because Eleanor Brooks chose to care. He lowered the microphone. I receive public recognition for leading this family. The truth is, she quietly reminded us why leadership matters in the first place. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then applause began. One teacher stood, then another. The librarians rose together. Veterans followed. Parents, volunteers, executives, judges, governors. Within seconds, the entire ballroom stood applauding. Not because Vincent had ordered it, because every word felt undeniably true. Richard remained frozen beside the podium. His earlier remark now sounded painfully small. No accusation had been made. No humiliation delivered. Yet everyone understood exactly who had earned genuine respect and who had merely possessed an impressive title. Eleanor looked at Vincent with quiet gratitude. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. For the first time since the day he had fired her, Vincent had not used his power to protect his reputation. He had used it to honor someone else's worth. And in doing so, he had finally become the leader Eleanor had always believed he could be. The applause lingered long after the gala ended. Guests continued discussing Eleanor's speech as they drifted toward the exits. Some approached her to introduce themselves. Teachers thanked her. Parents shared stories about children who had discovered a love of reading. Young librarians asked for advice. She greeted every person with the same patient attention she had always given, making each conversation feel like the only one that mattered. Across the ballroom, Vincent watched quietly. Years ago, he would have measured success by the number of influential people seeking his attention. Tonight, he realized that genuine respect looked very different. It could not be demanded. It could only be inspired. Several days later, Vincent stood outside Riverside Community Library once again. This time he carried no contracts. No assistants followed behind him. No chauffeur waited with the engine running. Only a single envelope rested in his hands. Eleanor looked up from arranging children's books as the bell above the door chimed. "You've become a regular visitor." "I suppose I have." She smiled. "What brings you here today?" He placed the envelope gently on the circulation desk. She opened it. Inside was a formal offer. Director of the Ashcroft Private Library. Complete authority over its future. A salary larger than most executives earned. Funding for literacy programs. Staff chosen entirely by her. She read every page carefully, then folded the papers and returned them. "I'm honored." Her voice remained gentle. "But no," Vincent blinked. "No? I've already found where I belong." He glanced around the little library. Children were painting bookmarks at one table. An elderly couple quietly shared the newspaper by the window. A young immigrant father practiced reading aloud with his daughter. Everyone looked comfortable. Everyone looked welcome. "You've built something beautiful." Eleanor nodded. "We built it. You and the community." She paused. "I don't want to leave them." Vincent lowered his eyes. For the first time in decades, rejection didn't make him angry. It made him think. "What if—" he began slowly. "I asked for something else?" She waited. He drew a careful breath. "Then tell me where I belong." The question carried no pride, no command, only honesty. Eleanor studied him for several quiet seconds. Then she smiled. "Not in front of me." He looked confused. She stepped closer. "Beside me." Those two words carried more meaning than any speech either of them had ever heard. Vincent smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that softened years of carefully controlled distance. "I think I'd like to learn how." The following months transformed both the Ashcroft Foundation and Riverside Community Library. Rather than persuading Eleanor to return to the mansion, Vincent chose a different path. The abandoned west wing of the Ashcroft Estates Library was renovated, not into an exclusive private collection, but into a free literacy center open to everyone. Senior citizens, veterans, children, immigrant families, adults who had never been given the chance to learn to read. There were no marble plaques celebrating the Ashcroft name, no portraits honoring Vincent's generosity. When journalists asked who had funded the project, the foundation simply answered, "A friend of libraries." Only Eleanor knew the truth. She never mentioned it. Every Saturday morning, the literacy center became wonderfully chaotic. Children rushed through the doors carrying backpacks almost larger than themselves. Volunteers served hot chocolate. Retired teachers tutored struggling readers. College students organized book drives. The once intimidating Ashcroft estate echoed with laughter instead of whispered formality. And in the middle of it all, Vincent Ashcroft sat on a tiny blue chair designed for kindergarten students. A picture book rested awkwardly in his large hands. Once upon a time, he paused dramatically, there lived a dragon who— "Wrong voice!" 3 children shouted together. "The dragon still sounds like somebody's grandpa." Another child raised his hand. "You forgot the squirrel again." Vincent sighed with theatrical defeat. "I was hoping none of you would notice." "We always notice." The room erupted into laughter. Across the reading corner, Eleanor covered her smile behind another book. "You've improved," she called across the room. "Barely." One little girl shook her head. "He's still bad." Another added kindly, "But not as bad as before." Vincent placed a hand over his heart. "I'll accept that as progress." After story time ended, children surrounded Eleanor as always. Each wanted one more hug, One more recommendation. One more promise about next week's story. Vincent never interrupted. He simply waited nearby, stacking chairs and collecting scattered crayons. Months earlier, he might have expected attention. Now, he found quiet satisfaction in watching kindness spread from one person to another. When the last child finally skipped toward the exit with their parents, the room settled into peaceful silence. Eleanor walked over, carrying 2 well-worn picture books. You waited. I don't mind. I know. She reached for his hand, naturally, effortlessly, as though it had always belonged there. They stood together in the quiet library, sunlight spilling across shelves filled with stories that would outlive them both. Outside, the Ashcroft estate still carried its legendary reputation. Business rivals still respected its influence. Politicians still requested meetings months in advance. Very little had changed in the eyes of the world. Everything had changed inside its walls. A young reporter, preparing an article about the Literacy Centre, approached Vincent before leaving. Mr. Ashcroft? He turned. May I ask one final question? Of course. What was the most valuable thing anyone ever stole from you? Vincent looked toward Eleanor, who was helping a little boy zip his backpack before reminding him to practice reading with his grandmother. He smiled softly. Nothing. The reporter looked puzzled. Vincent continued. She simply left, and took the feeling of home with her. He paused. But she also showed me that home isn't a place you own. It's something you build, one act of kindness at a time, Eleanor returned, slipping her hand into his once more. Together, they switched off the reading room lights. The grand mansion behind them remained one of the most powerful estates on the East Coast. But for Vincent Ashcroft, power no longer came from fear, wealth, or reputation. A mansion could command respect. A business empire could command influence. Only kindness could make either of them feel like home.